Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I like to discuss the critical problems and what the government call Brexit teething problems as they become very permanent from the point of view of those in the supply chain who can see things coming before it's felt by the consumers. If you think it's getting bad now, it's set to get worse still. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So I'd like to start with a few thoughts from a Welsh wine importer. The importer is Welsh, not the wine, by the way. I'll link the Twitter thread below rather than go over it blow by blow because what I want to do is focus on the things that are relevant to trade in general, because some of the things are specifically for the wine industry. And the first one is that the guy is actually able to name a Brexit positive. See, recently the government announced that it was scrapping VI1 import forms for wines, not just from the EU, but I think actually around the world, if I'm correct on that. And the industry had argued that it does no good and is just a useless barrier to trade. After a fair bit of lobbying, the government have agreed. So here is actually a bit of bureaucracy that has been removed as a result of Brexit. What this means is that the wine industry is actually lucky in that they get to name a Brexit benefit. So when you consider the later points that paint a picture of an industry still completely screwed by Brexit, consider that they actually got some benefit out of it, and it doesn't even come close to compensating. Then consider that the vast majority of industries got no upsides at all to counter the downsides. So then the first real point of downside that he brought up was logistics, big issue raised. He talked about the delays in getting stock. What used to take 3 to 5 days now takes weeks. That means they have to hold more in stock in order to avoid running out. That costs more money, as you can imagine, costs more money in both storage as well as management of that storage. He also cited the fact that EU haulage firms basically can't be arsed with the UK. His actual words, can't be arsed with the UK. It's too much of a hassle to ferry goods between Britain and the EU when they can have much easier trips between different parts of the single market. Now consider that this pain in the arse isn't even at its peak yet. The paperwork is onerous on both sides, but the checks are only on one side. Obviously, for haulage to be worthwhile, you need to keep those wheels rolling and you need your lorry full. So you need to drop something off in Britain and then pick something up to bring back. And that's even if you're just doing a shuttle run rather than a more circuitous route, which would be better. So that means delays getting back into the single market. Lorry drivers tend to get paid for their mileage, which isn't exactly ticking over when you're stuck in Kent having to work out where you can take a piss. So even with holding more stock to cover the delays in transport, you're also getting unreliable access to deliveries. You're also getting more expensive access to deliveries. But, unreliable is a key issue. And if your deliveries are unreliable, then you as a business are unreliable to your customers because you can't guarantee stock. Then the third point, the second big downside he made, was that the paperwork was different in different countries. So in his view, he said France has the easiest, Italy has the most difficult. But the point here is that when we were part of the single market, nobody had to worry about all these. The paperwork is for third countries to trade with them. Well, that's now us. And a point I've raised before is that if you trade with businesses in multiple countries, you have to follow multiple local procedures and laws. Look, consider this. The EU existed to give its members an easier time trading with each other than with people outside the club. That's the benefit. So that means way less bureaucracy, which is the bane of anyone's life. Unless you like that sort of thing, in which case you're actually sort of weird. Most of us hate paperwork. And it's a comparative thing. It has to be easier to trade inside the single market than from the outside. Otherwise, why would anyone want to be in the single market? So you immediately have more paperwork when trading from the outside. That's an easy concept to manage. That's straightforward. But because the EU doesn't manage trading with third countries, it only manages the single market. If you trade with France from outside, you use the French systems. If you trade with Spain, you use the Spanish systems. They're all different. It's got nothing to do with the EU. And so you have to familiarise yourself not only with more onerous paperwork, but lots of different kinds of paperwork. And when you consider that countries within the single market do most of their trade with other countries in the single market. It's not even really worth the time of these countries, these governments, these civil servants in these countries, making the process for third countries much easier. Like, you could understand it if most of your trade came from particular parts of the world. Well, you make it easier for them to trade with you. Of course you do. But when a relatively small proportion, it's like, it's not really worth the effort. So I can well imagine that the paperwork for some countries will be a nightmare. In fact, I'd probably guess that it's more of a nightmare in the countries that trade the least outside the single market, because it's even less in their interest to make the process easier. He then discussed a number of issues related purely to wine, very important for him, but I want to look at this from the point of view of all trade in food and drink at least. Because you could argue, you get some arguing that, well, wine is hardly the most pressing concern, is it? No pun intended. Although I do find it odd when you point out problems with what might be called luxuries and Brexit supporters churlishly saying, well, it's not that important, why are you going on about that? That doesn't really matter. Yeah, okay. If it was a downside offset by some massive upside, that argument would work. Like, if Brexit had somehow abolished child hunger and the flip side that was our supplies of wine were less reliable and more expensive, okay, I'll take that. That would be a major benefit with a small price to pay. But that's not the case. We're actually getting more child hunger out of Brexit. We don't have the upsides to balance out the downsides. So even when the downside is something relatively minor, you know, like harder to obtain or more expensive access to luxuries, that's still a black mark against Brexit because it was something we didn't have a problem with before. Where's the positives to balance it out? There aren't any. So that's got nothing. You've got nothing to counter it with. But all of the issues that I've talked about affect other importers as well. The documentation, the transport problems, and the final one, which was a fear of what happens when the checks are two-sided. So I'll say again, we're not really checking EU imports into Britain yet. Paperwork is needed, but physical checks are not taking place. The delays at the border right now, which we are not managing, are down to checks between Britain and France. A lot of businesses are worrying about what's going to happen when some start happening between France and Britain. This October is still the plan. Personally, I wonder if there'll not just be another delay on this. After all, we were supposed to be getting checks on high-risk animal and plant products this January. Then they were put off to July. They're put off to next January now. It's possible that the government hoped that we'd be managing the systems implemented so far on either side of the border. And then by October, they could start to, bring a few little minor ones in and then get ready for January when they bring the rest in. Once they accept that that's not going to be happening, I'm going to guess they'll just put those off as well. But traders still have to work on the assumption that the trade barriers are going to be raised as planned unless and until the government formally announce otherwise. Like, it's easy for me to say, well, the government will probably just delay it. A business can't afford to take that chance. Besides, at some point, they will have to carry out checks or else other countries are going to start having problems with us. And the last thing we need now is more problems with the major economies of the world while we're busy picking fights with our biggest customer. Do you know, it's like the countries run like black books right now. And the thing to bear in mind is that none of this is due to the critical shortage of workers that we have right now. That's still an issue. That's an issue that's getting worse. I may have to talk about that again this week. That's a completely separate issue. If that wasn't a problem, what I've discussed in this video would still be there. And as the wine importer was explaining, these are permanent features of our trading landscape. They're not teething problems. They're not getting better. They're not going away. They're here to stay. Except, of course, that's not quite true, is it? They are permanent features of the Conservatives' Brexit, the extreme Tory Brexit, as Ian Blackford calls it. These consequences are a direct result of our divergence. All we have to do is align and we'll see the problems diminish. And there are multiple opportunities for alignment. The more alignment we have, the smaller the trade barriers become. Something we will get if the Conservatives can be removed from office, because other parties are very much talking about more alignment. The parties that could actually form the next government are talking down divergence and up alignment. Labour have already talked about a new Brexit deal. That's further alignment. I'd like to think it means customs union and single market again, but the details are coming very slowly here. They're trying to annoy as few Brexit voters as possible, as we all know. Frankly, what would help enormously is less business owners complaining to the government about the problems that their Brexit is creating and more complaining to the public that there is a way to make the problems go away. That's really what needs happening. The Conservatives don't care about the problems businesses are facing. They know what the Prime Minister said about business. For goodness sake, how many more examples of this attitude do these businesses need? Stop complaining to the abusers who know full well what they're doing within certain parameters. Start complaining to people, your customers, the public, and then tell them what they can do about it. Tell them the plan. The plan is closer alignment. Persuade more people of the need for that. Don't cover for shortages by blaming some mythical environmental catastrophe in one of the few parts of Europe not actually suffering from some particularly devastating impacts from climate change right now. Say, we've run out of this because of Brexit. We're struggling to maintain supplies of this because of Brexit. How is it in a business's interest to allow the problems that are restricting their profitability to continue? By covering, all they're doing is making sure that the problems they have right now are going to stay in place. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.